Hello and welcome to today's episode of A Slice of Medieval. We have a wonderful guest returning for his second time, so we didn't scare him off first time, to chat about his new book. Angus Donald is the author of the best-selling Outlaw Chronicles, a series of 10 novels. Is it still 10 or is it 11 now?
11 now.
Yeah, 11 now, set in the 12th and 13th centuries and featuring a gangsterish Robin Hood. Angus has also published the excellent and much underappreciated, I think, because I think it was fabulous, Holcroft Blood trilogy about a mildly autistic 17th century English artillery officer, son of the notorious Crown Jewels thief Colonel Thomas Blood. Before becoming an author, Angus worked as a fruit picker in Greece, a waiter in New York City, and as an anthropologist studying magic and witchcraft in Indonesia. The novels you could write, Angus. For 15 years, he was a journalist working in Hong Kong, India, Afghanistan, and London. He now writes full-time from a medieval farmhouse in Kent and puts, I'm sure, many of his experiences into his books. Welcome back, Angus.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you both, Derek and Sharon, for having me on Slice. Very exciting to be back.
It's our pleasure, as always. So your new book, The Templar Traitor, touches on a topic that has fascinated me for years, the Templars. And a renegade Templar at that. What made you write this story?
There's never really one thing. I found a terrific story in history, and it was kind of the journalist in me that discovered it. Basically, I used to work for the Times newspaper, and one of the columnists there is called Matthew Paris, and so I read the Times every day, and I actually worked on the comment section for a while. And he made a comment. He made a throwaway remark in one of his columns about a mysterious Englishman who fought for Genghis Khan, and how it was chronicled by his near namesake Matthew Paris, who was a medieval monk from St Albans, and that was all he said in one of his columns. And I just fixated on that, and I thought, my God, what a terrific story. Here's a true story of an Englishman fighting for the Mongols when you never put those two things together. And that was about 5 or 6 years ago. And I started then researching and putting together and finding out everything I could about this Englishman. And there isn't an awful lot. What we do have is, let me tell you what happened. He was basically captured outside the gates of Vienna in July 1241. He was captured by a bunch of German knights defending Vienna, and they captured a squad of Mongols, and one of them was this blonde-haired English guy, and they said, "What the hell are you doing fighting?" Because the Mongols were seen as like the Tartars, the spawn of Tartarus, fiends, demons, cannibals, dog-headed monsters. They were absolutely demonized. And suddenly they found this Englishman who not only turned out to be an Englishman, but also a Templar. So a very part of a religious order, a very famous religious order. So they grabbed him, they tortured him, and they accused him of being a traitor to Christendom because he was fighting with the enemies with the forces of the devil. So this is all true. They tortured him, and the guy who interrogated him is called Ivo of Narbonne, and he wrote letters back to his bishop in Bordeaux saying, "We found this Englishman and this is what he says." And some of his confessions are a bit weird because he talks about dog-headed cannibals and stuff, and that's obviously not true. But some of the stuff probably is true, and we have the letters that this interrogator wrote back about this poor guy that they were torturing. So that's where the origin of the book starts. Once I discovered these letters and read them and various other books around it, I thought the framework of a really good story. And we know that he was in Acre in 1218 during the Fifth Crusade, and then we know that he was again in 1241 outside Vienna. The bit in the middle, not very much is known except that he was in Pest, which is now Budapest, earlier that year, and he was an ambassador for the Mongols, telling the Hungarians, "You better surrender or we'll destroy you." So he was firmly in the Mongol camp at that point. But in between, we don't know anything. So this is where, as you two both know very well, the historical novelist, this is what we do. We fill in the gaps between the known history. But it was the discovery. I mean, and I luckily we know a lot about Genghis Khan and the campaigns and the fights that he had in with the Khwarezmian Empire and against China and all that sort of stuff. So I was able to. I mean, I just made the assumption that he'd joined them. I had to ask myself why, and I've explored that. And then what did he do? He basically went along with the Mongol two men with their armies. And so I had the framework of history to follow there. So that's basically where it came from. This extraordinary true story that that I discovered from a newspaper article in the Times of 6 years ago.
That's bizarre, really, isn't it? I mean, it's how things happen, though. Sometimes a sort of spark from somewhere, and you sort of either start pulling at the thread or you ignore it, and there's a lot of those sort of things, aren't there?
Well,
Really?
there were lots of reasons. I mean, that's the sort of surface reason. There are lots of other reasons why it appealed to me because the story is really about an Englishman going into a strange alien Asia and having to find his feet in rather dangerous and exotic circumstances. And my own experience as a young man of going off into Asia and working. I mean, I traveled a lot when I was younger, and I used to go off on my own with a backpack and practically no money, and sort of just trust to my luck. And so this guy's story back in the 13th century really resonated. Obviously, his was a lot more dangerous than mine, but the idea of a young man going out into the unknown is very appealing to me because I've done that sort of thing. I went off to Afghanistan on my own, and during the war, and I went to China, and I went to all these places looking basically for adventure and to try and find a living when I got there, and for various other complicated reasons. But that sort of Englishman voyaging into Asia has struck a chord with me personally.
Yeah.
It's just you didn't join an invading army or anything, or did you? I
Well,
mean,
there were quite a lot of other Brits in Hong Kong when I was there, and they were pretty rambunctious, I have to say.
Yeah.
So I like the idea that you thought out a reason for him leaving the Templars as sort of in disgrace, but it must have been very hard to decide how to kick him out of the Templars.
Well, the problem with this, the big difficulty in writing this book is that nobody's telling the truth. So, you've got not just one unreliable narrator, I've got a whole host of them. So Ivo's lying, so is the Templar, so is Robert, the Englishman. When he gets to the Mongols, they're all lying to him too. So it's a lot of very complicated stories that are untrue, and you have to try and work your way through and work out what the truth is. And of course, it's all revealed, towards the end of the book, why he really went to Asia and why he was really kicked out of the Templars and all that sort of thing. But there's an awful lot of authorly misdirection and straight out unreliable narrating stuff because he's being tortured and he's trying to defend. They're trying to get the truth out of him, and he's trying to prevent them from knowing the truth.
Yeah.
That makes it more of a challenge to write rather than just a straightforward adventure novel. It's like there's a psychological process going on there as well.
And he's trying to stay alive long enough as well because they keep threatening him, executing him, don't they?
Yes, that's right. Yes, yeah.
So it's a fascinating story. I'm almost halfway through, and I'm really enjoying it. It's very refreshing actually to have a new idea for a story because it's not like anything else I've read recently.
No, it's not following a sort of well-trodden path of historical novels, is it really? It's I agree with Sharon. I mean, I'm really enjoying it. I haven't finished it yet either. But there is a freshness to it, Angus, which I'm really
thank you.
really appreciating.
I mean, I that's the problem with our line of work is that I think it was a few years ago, I was thinking about, what I might like to write next. And I came across this guy, Sir John something or other. And he was the White Company. Who was that guy? Sir John
Hawkwood. Was it
Hawkwood, that's
Hawkwood?
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Awkward. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
started reading about this guy and I thought, oh, fantastic. He sounds brilliant. Look at this guy. He was, he started as a fairly lowly guy, then he started his own company as mercenaries. Wow, great story. And I spent a couple of days thinking about it and researching it, and I realized there were already about five different series all
Yeah.
about this same guy, all set in
Yeah.
the Hundred Years War, and then in the wars in Italy and stuff. And
Mm.
I realized it was just so well trodden that I couldn't
Yeah.
possibly. I think Christian Cameron's done one. Various other people have also done.
Mm.
I hope you guys haven't done it, but
No.
but
No, I haven't ventured there for the same reason as you. I've sort of steered clear of that whole Hundred Years' War issue.
But on the other hand, there's things like Hastings, right, or William the Conqueror and all that kind of stuff has been done a lot, but it's still evergreen. They're just bringing
Mm.
out a new
Hmm.
TV or movie, I think it is. Is it
Series, I
TV
think. It's a
TV
TV
series? Yeah,
series.
around around Hastings and William and that whole thing. So clearly there's still an appetite. I mean,
Mm.
it's just
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
I quite like original takes on things. So, my Robin Hood wasn't a nice guy; he was a gangster.
Yeah.
The Holcroft Blood thing, he wasn't an ordinary guy; he was autistic, which gave it a slight thing. And
Yeah.
this story is just out and out bizarre, but true. But that's the
Mm.
thing that's the thing that's so
Yeah.
interesting about it.
So, how much did you have to deviate from the known facts of the story?
Well, there are so few known facts of the story that it wasn't very hard. In fact, I didn't deviate at all.
Mm.
Um, Basically, we know that he was in Acre in 1218 during the Fifth Crusade. We know that he reappears again in 1241, more than 20 years later, as an ambassador for the Mongols. And then we know that he was captured later that year in the summer outside Vienna in 1241, and then he was tortured in Vienna Castle. And that's kind of all we've got, except for a few
Hmm.
other scraps that other people have managed to find that he was a Templar, he was an Englishman. He was probably from Essex, and I made him from Kent because they just think he was from somewhere in the south of England, and I'm from Kent. So I thought, what the
Yeah.
hell, we'll make him from my where I actually live, which is Hadlow in Kent. So
Mm.
he's called Robert of Hadlow, which is in fact where I live.
Right.
And
So,
that should
it's
give
your
you,
house basically. This is you
well, yeah,
from in the 13th century.
the manor that he well, the manor of Hadlow was there in the 13th century, and it's a dreadful place full of pigs and stuff. And I've included it in two novels so far because I know that it was in the Doomsday Book, and I know that it was there, and so
Mm.
it's kind of fun. But I didn't really deviate all that much. I mean, it's not just his story; it's also the story of Genghis Khan. I mean, I don't know if you've got to the bit about Otrar yet, but that's the most extraordinary story which I really wanted to tell. And if I can, I just briefly tell you what
Hmm.
happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's basically the Mongols were involved in fighting in China, the other end of the world, and they'd captured bits of the Silk Route, which connects China to the Mediterranean, and Genghis Khan sent out ambassadors and envoys. By the way, in Mongol culture, ambassadors are inviolate. If
Mm.
you hurt the ambassador, if you insult him or kill him or injure him, you are effectively doing the same to the Great Khan. So they were very strict about this. So Genghis Khan sent out, I think it was 500 merchants with a massive train of camels carrying gold and silver and silks and porcelain. And they went to the Khwarezmian Empire, which is basically Persia. It's Persia plus Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and various. It's a huge sort of block in the middle of the world. But I'm going to call it Persia for the sake of ease.
Mm.
So he sent this from Mongolia, from China. He sent this huge train of camels, very richly things, and they got to Otrar, which is right on the northern border, on the sort of northeastern border of the Khwarezmian Empire, sort of Persia. It's up by the Aral Sea, if that helps you locate it. It's a ghost town. It's nothing left. And when they got there, these merchants were welcomed by the governor of Otrar and Then they were given food and allowed to rest and to have a bath and stuff, and after a long desert journey, and then they were all slaughtered. And their rich goods were taken by the governor of Atra. So he killed 500 people. One guy escaped by hiding in a bath, and managed to make it back to Genghis Khan. This is a true story. And the governor of Atra stole all their stuff, all their gold, all their silks, all that stuff. Then Genghis Khan said, "Well, why the hell did you do this?" To the Shah of Khwarezmia, Shah of Persia, and sent three ambassadors. One was a Mongol relative of his, a high Mongol, and two were Muslim clerics. And the governor of Atra humiliated them, shaved their beards off, burnt all their hair off, and beat them up and kicked them out. And this was the last provocation. So that's why Genghis Khan decided he was going to conquer Persia. He was going to conquer the Khwarezmian Empire. So he sent back a letter saying, "You have, stolen my goods and humiliated my thing. I'm going to come against you with an army you cannot imagine." And he did so. He stopped fighting in China, turned his whole thing around and came down, which is a huge logistical enterprise, and brought probably 100,000, maybe 200,000 people, fighters, down towards that. And within 2 years, he'd conquered the whole Khwarezmian Empire as far west as almost as far as Baghdad. So he conquered that whole thing, from Afghanistan to Baghdad. He conquered that all in 2 years because they ripped off his camel train and humiliated his ambassadors. And I love that story of kind of, don't mess with us, or don't mess around and find out, if you'll forgive me. And I think that's one of the things that appeals to me about the Mongols so much, as they are so hardcore. They also had this way of going up. They'd go up to a city and they'd say, "Surrender right now, or we will destroy. We won't leave one stone standing on another. We'll kill every man, woman, child, cat, dog, mouse, or you can surrender right now." And the first time they did this, the people refused to surrender, and then they destroyed the town completely. And the next town they went to, everybody immediately surrendered. It was a very effective tactic, giving this ultimatum. The same thing the Romans did, actually, but I'm sure it's been copied many times.
Yeah. So were they nomads, the Mongols?
Yes,
So they moved over quite a large area of their home, loosely home area in Mongolia,
yes,
I'm assuming.
yes.
Um,
Yeah, no, it was one of their great strengths. I mean, they basically were nomadic, so that they moved with their horses and their herds over large areas of the steppe, and they were kind of able to feed themselves entirely from this moving community of, sheep and goats and probably some yaks as well, and their horses. So they were kind of self-sufficient and mobile.
mm,
And they continued to do that when they were at war. So when they were invading, for example, Europe later on in the 13th century, they came with their herds and their horses and their families and their wives and their children and their tents and all of that. And they just came with it. It was just how they operated. And that's part of the reason why the Europeans were so frightened of them, is because they seemed so numerous, but actually only 1 in 5 was a combatant. The rest were
mm,
wives, children, servants, that kind of thing.
Mm.
But it looked like a huge mass of people coming at you. And when they parked themselves on a bit of land, they would completely strip it of
yeah.
grass, of any living things, of all crops. They'd be stolen, looted, and then they'd move on, leaving it a wasteland.
Mm,
So yes, they were definitely nomadic. And these nomadic people breed fantastic horsemen who are very fast and mobile, very tough because they're used to a hard life out on the steppes, and they completely outmatched almost everybody they met, because I mean, they were able to run rings around the kind of the knights of Europe, who are wrapped in steel and heavy horses, and their one tactic was a big heavy charge when they come barreling at you, and the Mongols, of course, were light horsemen, so they'd come up and they'd taunt you and they'd fire arrows at the line of steel-clad knights, and then they'd pretend to run away, and the knights would all charge, and then they'd go further and further and further away, and then they'd peel off round the sides, and the knights are all exhausted. If you imagine a big heavyweight boxer lumbering around, punching at the
Mm.
air and missing it, and the little guy dancing and dodging, like a sort of Charlie Chaplin, I think he did that one. But that's exactly the same thing. And then they would prepare an ambush. So they'd get these knights to charge into the thing. They'd be exhausted. Their horses would be exhausted. At which point, the real Mongol attack would happen. So,
Mm.
so this
Mm.
nimbleness was very important for their battle tactics. And it all comes out of them being nomads and steppe horsemen. You know.
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
were talking before we started recording, and I was saying how I sometimes get, I know the Mongols are 13th century, but I always have this thought, and I've just had it then, that they are from, you hear about them in an earlier century, but you were saying that's the Hun, isn't it? So the Mongols are
Yes,
descended from the Hun?
it's very difficult to say. Up in that part of the world, between, Russia, China, up there, in Mongolia and on the steppe. The steppe is a huge area of grasslands that runs from China to Hungary. And that's all, there's a huge strip of the world up there, which is basically pretty barren except for grass. And you have all sorts of little clans and tribes and nations up there. And one of these in the 4th century was called the Xingnu, which became the Huns. And they were, I think, probably being pushed out by a larger, more aggressive group, and then came west into Europe
Mhm.
and ended up on the Hungarian plain, which is the very end. They were shoved out of the main bit, and they ended up at the end of the steppe, which is the Great Pannonian Plain underneath the Carpathian Mountains, where Hungary is basically.
Yeah.
Mm.
And they were Huns, and they came butting up against the Roman Empire. So the end of the Roman Empire and the Huns was that. And they're basically the same sort of people. I don't quite know what the linguistic link is, but I think Hunnic is a Turkish language. I'm not sure about this. But they were one of the many tribes on the steppes. 700 years later, so that's 5th century, so 13th century, Genghis Khan unifies all the different tribes. So there are Tartars, there were Mongols who were one small tribe, there were Tartars who were another tribe, there's Kerets, there's Naimans, there's all sorts of little tribes who are all living basically the similar lives, similar religion, similar animals. They just happen to be different, and they're always at war with each other and stealing each other's wives and stealing each other's crops and fighting wars and having alliances. And Genghis
Mm.
Khan's genius was that he united them all into one thing. He said, I'm a Mongol, you're all now Mongols. And he was very strict with his discipline, and he reorganized them into a sort of a decimally based army. And they were incredibly strong because they were all these tough little groups that he unified, and that's why they were so powerful. So they were probably, I don't know what happened to the Huns. I think they just disappeared or they changed their name, but they were living a very similar lifestyle with great flocks of sheep and goats and yaks
Mm.
and lots of horses traveling over the steppe, grazing their things, fighting little petty wars with each other, and living and dying in their yurts on the eternal blue sky, which is the name of their god. Same.
Yeah, I suppose the whole lifestyle of the people of the steppe kind of lends itself to, if there's a real problem, you move, because that's what you do anyway.
Yeah.
So the idea that these people have migrated westwards is kind of, I mean, it's sort of what they would do if faced with a problem further east, isn't it?
Yes,
I mean, it's just their lifestyle is suited to moving in that way.
I think it would happen sort of organically because I mean, if you've got a
Yeah,
powerful, aggressive neighbor who's always stealing your women and killing your sheep and killing you, you tend to kind of edge away,
yeah,
and then when you go somewhere where you bump into somebody over the next one along, and they kind of move away. So there's sort of a general edging,
yeah,
with lots of bloodshed and fighting, and
yeah,
but some of them ended
yeah,
up in Hungary, and fighting against the Romans across the Danube.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, in the early part of the book, you sent me down a rabbit hole because I was aware of the name Prester John, but
Uh,
I hadn't looked into it. So I spent about 3 hours then going, okay, who's Prester John? Because you mentioned this character, Prester John, and nobody seemed to be quite sure whether he was a real person. Um, a king in India or wherever. And when I looked into it, it's still true today, isn't it? Nobody actually knows who this Prester John is. And there was this one letter that must have sent everybody thinking, where is he? Who is he? What is he? How is he?
He was called John the Presbyter, and I'm not quite sure what a presbyter is. I think it's something like a Baptist or something. It's some religious thing. But John the Presbyter, or Prester John, was a sort of a mythological figure.
Mm.
The Christians in Europe believed that there was a great Christian monarch. It's probably in India. India just meant somewhere out there because I didn't really know
Yeah.
about India. So somewhere out there, there's a great Christian monarch who's going to ride to our rescue at some point. And it was a lovely sort of pipe dream that the medieval Christians had whenever they were in trouble, that out there was a great savior, an Indian or an Asian Christian monarch, very powerful, very rich, who would come in and usher in a period of peace and prosperity. And he was kind of like a mythological figure, a sort of Father Christmas figure. I
Mm.
mean, they didn't have Father Christmas in those days, but that everybody sort of believed in, but didn't quite believe in either. So some people say that he was a descendant of one of the three magi who had blessed Christ in Bethlehem at his birth. Others that he was someone who was converted by St. Thomas, who, after the death of Christ, went off to India to preach Christianity and then converted this king who became a powerful king. No one really knew who it was. Later on, they thought that he was Haile Selassie, who
Mm.
was in a Coptic Christian down in Abyssinia, Ethiopia.
Mm.
There was always a belief that out there was this powerful, wonderful person. And I think it was about at the end of the 12th century, this letter started to circulate, which was um, it was signed John Christian Monarch, Emperor of India, or something like that, and it was a forgery, and everyone kind of recognized it was a forgery. The Templars actually looked at it and said, "No, no, it's a forgery. This can't be real." But it's still, it's like fake news. It still goes
Mm.
round and round and round. And we go, "No, but there's a letter from him, and he wants to come and help us." So he was this great sort of off-screen, benevolent bogeyman that never quite existed. And then when they found out about Genghis Khan, a lot of people said, well, Genghis Khan must be Prester John
Mm.
because he was tolerant of all religions. This is one of the things that people don't know about the Mongols. They were actually quite tolerant. Genghis Khan didn't care what you believed. He had all these different tribes, which he'd amassed into one Mongol nation. And some of them believed in this holy mountain. Some believed, worshipped this sacred stream, and some were Muslims, and some were actually Christians. There's I've forgotten the word for them. Nestorian, and some members of Genghis Khan's own family. His daughter-in-law Sorkoktani was Nestorian. They were Nestorian Christians in Asia who were heretics as far as the Catholic Church was concerned, and they weren't connected with the Orthodox Church, but they were just like another brand, and they got as far as China. So there were Christians out there. Some members of Genghis Khan's own family were Christian. He was very tolerant to Christians and didn't sort of persecute them or anything. But he was also tolerant to Muslims. As long as they obeyed him, he didn't mind what they believed. So people in Europe put all this together and thought that Genghis Khan might be Prester John. So that's another sort of strand. And then, but Prester John's never been found and he didn't exist. But it's a sort of fantasy of medieval Christendom that out there was a great benevolent Christian ruler. And that's who Prester John was, a fictional character.
Must have been quite a big disappointment when they actually found that Genghis Khan wasn't quite cast in that particular way.
No, well, you'll read about it when you get further into the book.
Yes, yeah. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is always a difficult question. Without too many spoilers, is there more to come after Templar Traitor? Is it the first of several, or is it a complete story in itself?
It's a complete story in itself, but it's also the first in a trilogy.
Right.
Um, Basically, the structure. I think it's going to be a trilogy. That's what I've agreed with my publisher. But if it goes really well, there's room to expand. But
Yeah.
let's call it a trilogy for the moment. The first one is in my mind the confession. So it's this Englishman making his confession. The second one is the trial, and the third one is the judgment. So it's three different acts about what happens, and there's a sort of meta story which is what's going on in Vienna in 1241 with
Mm.
him having a battle of wits with his interrogator, and then there's another thing which is the court case. So he's also being tried and by the Duke of Austria, and then the third one is the whatever happens at the end, and that's the meta story that runs on top. And underneath that is the story of the Englishman. So the first book only goes up to the spring of 1221, so it's only the first 3 years,
Yeah.
and I've got another 17 years to go. And this is why I'm wondering whether a trilogy is going to be enough, because there's so many things, interesting things that happened. But the second one is called Templar Assassin, and I'm writing that at the moment. And the third one will be Templar something. I don't know what yet, and I'll do that next year. So
Mm.
the moment that the plan is to do one every year until the trilogy's done. But if it goes, if it's a howling success, there's no reason why it shouldn't be a quartet or even a quintet. So we'll see.
Mm.
But at the moment, I'm thinking in terms of three novels.
So you've also got Robin Hood and the Heretic
Oh
Prince,
yes,
was it?
absolutely.
That's just been released. Are you back into Robin Hood now then? Is there going to be more?
Yes. I don't know. People probably don't know the story. I wrote 8 books, 8 Robin Hood books between 2009 and 2016, and that was with Little Brown, and it was very successful, and people liked it. And then I got bored after 8 books and wrote The Death of Robin Hood and killed him off.
As you do.
As you do. I thought 8 was enough.
Yeah.
And then I got a lot of people saying, no, no, you shouldn't have killed him off. Why did you do that? We loved him. Surely there's scope for more adventures. And I was writing other things, and I carried on writing other stories, other books. But people kept niggling, and every time I said, "What should I do next?" They go, "More Robin Hood," and I go, "No, no, I'm going to do some. I'm going to do a Viking thing. No, I want to do some more Holcroft Blood." And they go, "No, no, do more Robin Hood." So I realized that there was a market for it. So during COVID in lockdown, everything else was shut down. Nobody was. I had written a Viking novel that I couldn't get anyone to read, let alone buy, because all the publishers were closed. So I thought, here's an
Mm.
opportunity. So I wrote 2 Robin Hood novels, Robin Hood and the Caliph's Gold, which slotted in after the heroes are coming back from the Third Crusade. So between books 2 and 3, there was a year's gap, and I put 2 novels in there, Robin Hood and the Caliph's Gold and Robin Hood and the Castle of Bones. And that was quite weird because I was going back to Alan Dale, who was still only a teenager and very naive. And that was kind of fun to revisit that. And he wasn't Sir Alan Dale, he was just Alan Dale Trouvere. And that was really fun. And it was an exploration. It was the first time I'd tried any self-publishing, which now quite a big fan of. And they sold well. They're still selling well. People, it's still providing a reasonable income just from those 2 books. So I thought, well,
Mm.
I'll do another one. And that was late last year, early this year. I wrote Robin Hood and the Heretic Prince, which is about the Albigensian Crusade. I left another big gap between the Iron Castle and the King's Assassin. I left a 7 or 8 year gap there, and I'm going to put 2 novels in there too, of which I've written Robin Hood and the Heretic Prince, which is about the terrible sack of Béziers in 1209. And there's going to be a 12th and final Robin Hood novel, Robin Hood and the Holy Grail, which will be out when I've written it sometime next year. I've got another series. I've got a King Arthur thing, which I've done the first one, and I've got to continue that. And I have another thing as well, which I can't talk about, which is a fantasy series, which I'm hoping to do something with. And I've written a sitcom, which I'm trying to, which I just think is a really brilliant idea. It's called Viking Bikers, and I've written the first chapter, and I had some spare time, and I just wrote this in about a month, and I think it's quite funny. And I've got to try and find a way into putting it in front of TV producers and seeing if anybody wants to do that. Anyway.
Well, if anybody's listening,
yeah, if you want a children's comedy called Viking Bikers, written by me, very silly, lots of fart jokes, then give us a shout.
Oh, that's brilliant. Oh, and I'm so glad you're continuing the King Arthur series. Is that going to be the same? Because that was written, what was it? One chunk a month for.
Yeah, that's right. It was about sort of 5 chapters each.
Yeah.
I did 5 of those. It was an experiment. Basically, what I found was that I was writing a big novel, and that would take me kind of 6 months or whatever, or 5 months, and I'd have that, and then I'd have a little bit of downtime, and then I'd write another big thing. But in the bits between the novel, I'd send it off and I'd have to wait until I was getting the marks back from the editors and the publishers and stuff. And I thought, well, I've got this downtime, I might as well use it. And I started writing this King Arthur novel, and I wrote a few chapters and then I stopped. And then I would go and do something else. And I realized they were just sitting there. And I thought, well, what if I put out 4 or 5 chapters, and then the next time I've got a gap, I'll write another 4 or 5 chapters and put them out, and then I'll do that. And then so every once in a while. And I thought it was a very clever idea because people would get the book in chunks. It wasn't a very clever idea because I read the chunk and then so where's the rest of it? And I'm going, I haven't written it yet because I've got to do something else first, and then they'd forget about it. And then once the time it took me a sort of year to put the whole thing out in bits and pieces. And then I published the whole thing as a single novel, and it diluted the impact of the book, and I think probably affected the writing. I mean, I still think it's quite good.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's brilliant. I loved it. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I was one of those who, as soon as the next chunk came out, it was like, right, that's my weekend sorted. But I know what you mean. It was like, okay, and now I've got another 3 months or 4 months or however long Angus takes to get round to the next bit. But yeah, I did read them as soon as each portion came out.
When you release a book, you need to have a big punch, lots of publicity. There's a whole book for someone to read, not bits of a book. You only have to do, if you're self-publishing, you only have to commission 1 cover rather than 5, 6 I did for that one. And you only have to go through the publishing process once, which is time-consuming and fiddly. And then everybody reads it, you get all the reviews, you get the momentum going, you get the number of reviews up on Amazon, which then drives the algorithm to get people to read it. And you don't get any of that stuff if you release it in dribs and drabs. So I won't be doing that again, I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just an experimental idea because I had a bit of writing which I thought was quite good, and I thought people might like to read it. But I think what I'm going to have to do is sit down. I mean, it's actually more efficient with your brain and your time to sit down and write a whole thing and take 3 months and bam, do the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, last year.
So I've got to do one of those. Yeah.
Last year, I thought, well, why don't I try and write 2 things at once? And now I know why.
Yes. Yes, it's really difficult, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I could do it, but as you say, your brain kind of needs to focus on one story at a time, or one period at a time.
Yes, yeah. The only advantage is that if you come up with a nice little turn of phrase, you can use it in another book.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I'm not very good at multitasking. I've been doing all sorts of things this year, and I haven't really focused on Templar Assassin, which is the next one. And we're going on holiday on Saturday for 10 days, and once I get back from my holiday, I'm going to just not accept any invitations to go anywhere or do anything, and I've just got to put my head down and get the second Mongol one out there. Or get it to my editors, and then I can take a breath and think about what I want to do. Probably another Robin Hood, because I'd like to finish. It's very sort of OCD of me or something, but I don't want there to be 11 Robin Hood books. It doesn't seem right. It should be 12. But not 13. So basically 12. So Robin Hood and the Holy Grail, I think it's going to be called. So no, I don't hold me to that, but Robin Hood and the Holy Grail. will be the last and final Robin Hood story. And then I'm going to hang up my bow and quiver.
I'm sure people will be looking forward to the next one anyway.
Well, thank you. I hope they are.
Yeah, I'm sure it's very popular.
Speaking of Mongols, I was just thinking you were talking about them being experts with the horse. Were they the ones who used to use bow and arrow from the saddle? And
Yes, very much so. Yes.
it was one of the things that.
I mean, that's all of the steppe warriors, all of the people from the steppe, the Huns as well,
Mm,
would use the same tactics and the same bows and arrows and stuff. They also the other thing that they did, which is quite disgusting. Two things that they did, which is quite disgusting. Um, their horses were very tough, and when the Mongol ran out of food, he would cut the neck of his horse and drink the horse's blood or mix it with his rice to give him some protein and then slap a bit of mud over the top to it. And the horse would just lose half a pint of blood and the Mongol warrior would get a meal. And the horses were also very, very tough in that they would scrape away the snow to eat the lichen or moss on the ground underneath the snow so they could survive in really harsh
mm.
conditions. And the second really disgusting thing is that they would have a lot of dried mutton. They had vast sheep herds and goat herds. So they had a lot of dried mutton. And to tenderize it, they would put the strip of dried mutton between the saddle and the horse's flesh
Right.
and then ride on it all day. So it would be tenderized by a combination of horse sweat and the pounding of this guy as he galloped across the steppe. And then it came out to be this limp, tenderized bit of thing, rehydrated with horse sweat. Sorry, that was really disgusting.
Oh God.
You might want to cut that one out.
Did they cook it then, or did they eat it just like that?
No,
No, it was already
I'm sure
cooked.
they
It was
did.
already dried, wasn't it?
No, they probably cooked it. I put that bit in the book, and my editor said this is the most disgusting thing I've ever heard, and I can't remember if I took it out or
Oh
not.
God, that
But
might be the first time. If you've kept it in, that might be the first time. I mean, I've cried reading a book before, but I've never thrown up after reading a book, so we'll see.
oh, yeah, sorry. Well, authenticity. That's what I'm going for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Hmm.
But it just shows you do, what you have to do to survive, don't you? I mean, when you're used to living in an environment when it's hard to get food and food has to be hardy and tough, then you do what you can.
Well, I mean, the great bane of European medieval armies was food because if you've got 10,000 people, they eat and 20,000
Mm.
horses, they eat an enormous amount, and that food has to either be taken from the land you're passing through, it basically looted, or you've got to bring it with you. Whereas the Mongols were kind of self-sufficient. All they needed was a horse, a bit of grass, and their herds and they could kind of
Mm.
go anywhere. And because their diet was very largely
Mm.
meat based, they hardly ever ate any grain. So it was all meat and milk was their diet. I don't know what that
I
did to
was
their
gonna
guts, but
say.
um, you know, but I mean, I suppose that's how they were adapted to it. I mean, it was all meat and they had this very basic stew, hardly any salt either in their diet, but they had this stew called a shulan which was what they ate basically every day. And it's basically strips of dried or possibly tenderized mutton boiled in water. And that's what they ate every night. You put a pot on the fire and it comes to boil and you shave a bit of meat and then you've got your
Mm.
stew and that's all, nothing else in it. It's so basic, so horrible. Can you imagine putting beef jerky in a pot of boiling water and that's your supper?
Again and again and again.
Yeah, every night, and or fermented mare's milk. They'd milk their own horses, the mares, and then let it go bad, and then they'd drink
Mm.
that.
But they also had arak, which is alcohol from milk.
That no kumis it's called,
All
and
right.
it's fermented and it is mildly alcoholic, um, actually, but only I mean it's like wheat beer, that kind of like a sort of
Mm.
watered Dutch shandy or something like that. So when they came to Persia and discovered wine, um, they thought they drank it in the same way that they would drink their kumis, so massive bowls, large quantities to get a little buzz on because it's only shandy, right?
Yeah.
But then when they started drinking pints of wine, they all became raging alcoholics. And one of the successor to Genghis Khan was his second or third son called Ogadai, and he was a huge alcoholic. They all were because they sat when they were on their downtime. They sat around in their tents and got drunk. And he, because he'd conquered everything, he just sat around getting drunk all the time. And his doctors, his Chinese doctors, were very worried. So they said to him, "Look, you've got to stop drinking so much wine." They loved the wine. You know, they looted all this amazing Persian Shiraz and all that kind of stuff, and drank it by the gallon. So his doctors said to Ogadai, the great Khan, "Look, you've got to cut down your drinking. You can't drink as much. You can only have 10 cups of wine a day." And so Ogadai said, "Fine, I'll stick to that." And then he went to his potters and he made them construct massive cups this size so he could still drink his 10 cups of wine a day.
Oh dear.
He died actually. His death. He died of alcohol poisoning. His death saved Europe because the Mongols got as far as Vienna. This is where the book opens in 1241. That's as far west as they got. But they could have gone further. You know, they were winning. They'd beaten the Poles, they'd beaten the Russians, they'd beaten the Hungarians, and they could have come into Europe, and that would have changed. It's one of those what if moments.
Yeah.
At Vienna, Austria, but then they all went back to Mongolia because Ogadai died of drinking too much. And when the great Khan dies, everybody, all the other commanders have to go back and elect the next guy. And if you don't turn up to the Kurultai, it's called, the parliament, if you don't turn up, you're declaring yourself a rebel and will be annihilated by the rest of the Mongol tribe. So they all had to go back. Everybody had to go back to Mongolia. And then Europe suddenly was like, where the hell is everywhere? Where are these terrifying enemies? They've all disappeared. And so that drinking of Ogadai saved Europe.
Wow.
Goodness.
Well, I think that's a great place to end this conversation because that is brilliant. The things you discover in research, Angus.
It's fun, isn't it? That's why we love what we do, I think.
Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with Templar Traitor. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, so I'm sure it's going to be a big hit.
Thank you, Derek. Yeah. Thank you, Sharon. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, good to talk to you again.
Yeah, good luck with your own stuff, and
yeah, thank you.
And thank you very much for inviting me on the show. Slice of Medievals, one of my favorite podcasts. So I hope to be invited on another day, perhaps.
Oh, I'm sure you will.
Okay, great talking to you.
I'm sure we'll have to do a Robin Hood discussion with you at some point.
Yeah, when that 12th book comes out, if not before.
We can have an overview of the whole series.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much indeed.
Okay then.
Thank you both once again, Derek, Sharon. It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Angus. Always lovely chatting with you. Bye-bye. Do join us next time when Derek and I will be trying to answer the question, why did Edward V not keep his throne? I've been Sharon Bennett Connolly.
And I'm Derek Birks. You may know that our podcasts are on YouTube as well as on your favourite podcast providers. It would be great if you could spare the time to give us a review or a like. And obviously, you could subscribe as well. Thanks for listening.